there's a technical word for it in literature. I forgot what it's called, but it's like internal logic. And as authors say that as long as your story has internal logic and follows it and doesn't break its own rules, then the suspension of disbelief from the audience will remain intact.
Welcome back to Out of the Box podcast. We're Steele and I, your host, Jose Tapia, get to talk about out of the box ideas. Today, we're going to be talking about how ideas, how intellectual property becomes mainstream. And I know we talked about before with one of our guests, Ian, about how different um, characters are created and um, how people become so attached to like uh different different collectibles or different stuff like that, how things um economically are become in demand. But today we wanted to talk about a little bit more in the aspect of how how to initially create characters like out of imagination, and how are some stories just so impactful to people. And so we want to touch upon those topics. But before we actually get started, I want to invite you guys to subscribe to our channel. It really helps us to continue providing amazing content for you guys, and also leaving a like down below if you do enjoy this podcast. So, without further ado, so I'll start a little bit. So, one of the things that really impressed me, I just recently went to Florida again, to Orlando, and I was in the Harry Potter world in Island of Adventure. This is a theme park of Universal Studios, and one of the things that amazed me so much is how somebody is able to take you into the world that somebody in the past thought about. They dreamt about it. They wrote books about it, and they bring it now into reality. And it just becomes so vivid, almost as if you were part of it, right? It takes you into this other world, and it makes you dream. And I was just there pondering and thinking, how did this person, J.K. Rowling, uh, come up with this idea? How was it that they were able to come up with it? And not only that, that they were able to make it so mainstream. That is one of the things that amazed me. And so that's why I really wanted to kind of touch on this topic. I know recently we've had also the Spider-Man movie come out, and that's been so impactful as well. So, as an initial question, why do you think still that these characters become so mainstream in society? Is it because we can relate to them? Is it what do you think is the defining factor of mainstream stories and characters?
Yeah, that's a really good one because it's sometimes very hard to predict what will become so mainstream. And I know, like, going off what we talked about last week, I mean, like, something like Star Wars, for example, or even Harry Potter, like you mentioned, J.K. Rowling, you take something like that that just seems so ridiculous. Like, you look at it and forget about it being Harry Potter for a second, or Star Wars, and just forget about your experiences with it for a second, and look at it with fresh eyes, and then you think, wow, this is just the most ridiculous ideas, but they're the most popular ideas right now, like today, and for years they've been very popular and very mainstream. So like like children going to a school where they learn how to be wizards. Like, it sounds crazy, it sounds silly, but it happens to be really good idea and people love it all across the whole world. And same with Star Wars, it sounds ridiculous on the surface level. Like, you talk about like a dog walking around with a princess, fairy tale princess, with like a guys who with guns that shoot light from them, and then they have swords, but they're not really swords, they're just beams of light that they fight with, and it's in space. Like, it just sounds crazy, but and yet it happens to be one of the most popular beloved franchises, like, ever. Like, almost everyone's heard Star Wars. Most people have seen Star Wars. It's still going to this day, and Harry Potter is still going on to this day. So why does one idea become mainstream when another one doesn't?
Yeah.
And
Do you think it might also be that, they just had a really good business person along with them to help them promote it? because it makes me think like maybe somebody wrote like something as that could eventually become as popular as Harry Potter, but they just never had the right person to publish it or the right person to put it
Yeah.
out there.
Well, see, with that, I would say, like with J.K. Rowling, for example, we talked about this too, how her book for Harry Potter was rejected like 100 or so times before it finally got accepted by a publisher. So even
Yeah.
that idea is still, the idea is still so popular to this day, got rejected 100 or so times before finally being accepted. So I think maybe it takes the right idea, but it also maybe it takes persistence because George Lucas with Star Wars, he had to be persistent too. No one believed in his idea, and I'm glad he pushed through it because everyone wouldn't have Star Wars. So, because I mean, you think about it when you first hear about it, it sounds kind of ridiculous, right? But push through it. So I think maybe it's persistence, but I also think it's having a very unique, original, iconic idea, and I think the word iconic is so important because I think that's what differentiates. Because when I look at movies that are mainstream and movies that are not, the mainstream ones like Marvel and Star Wars and DC, they tend to be very, very iconic. Like the superhero costumes, they stand out from anything else. You look at cowboy movies, and one of the ones that stand out the most, the Clint Eastwood ones, because they're iconic. His name is iconic. So I think you have to have something iconic about it. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if that plays a role in movies.
Yeah.
Something is,
What would you say defines iconic? Like
what
what
is,
makes something iconic?
yeah, what is iconic?
Yeah.
I think
Like
iconic is like different than the norm, if that makes sense. Because we look at everyday normal life, and it's all around us all the time. But something iconic is something that you take ordinary things and mix them together, or
mhm. I think you got, yeah. I think you touched on a topic, something that seems like familiar but still a little bit out of the box kind of deal,
a little different.
right? So it's almost like people can still relate to it. It's not like an alien from the planet Zero, and he writes with his nose, and just like, I
Yeah,
mean, we and it's interesting because we can only create from what we know, right? And so, but stories and characters, they they gain some traction because they stand out, like you said. But why do they stand out? Because they have a touch of similarity or familiarity with something that we've experienced in the past, but still kind of feels new. It's almost like a song, right? Why do some songs like just kind of hit home? Because we've kind of, and I've heard a lot of like songwriters talk about this, is that you want to make a song that seems familiar to what people have heard before, but still sounds a little bit different, so that they can accept the song, and not feel too like some people don't like jazz because they don't understand it. But it has to be enough familiarity with the level of understanding that people have of the music of music, and then but a little bit just like different or a little bit off. Maybe you add something different to just slightly change the scale, and that will seem innovative and new. It's just kind of like revamping it kind of deal.
yeah, and a lot,
And I think that's what they've done with Marvel. They just revamped it every year, and they just
right.
create more out of the same thing.
That's true, and it can get repetitive when you do it like that. When Marvel does it for decades now, or over a decade now. So yeah, I can definitely get that way. But I think you're right. It's something that's slightly different, but still relatable to our reality. So like Superman is, when he's not Superman, he's a journalist. That's relatable. That's real life. It's grounded in some way. Star Wars, the lightsabers seem out there, but they're based on swords, so we can relate to it and understand how they work. And everything in Star Wars follows certain rules of logic. It's not like things just happen randomly. Like everything, the Force. Not everyone has the Force. The Force has certain rules. There's only certain things you can do with the Force. So like I think that's called in there's a technical word for it in literature. I forgot what it's called, but it's like internal logic. And as authors say that as long as your story has internal logic and follows it and doesn't break its own rules, then the suspension of disbelief from the audience will remain intact.
Mm.
I think movies that just go all over the place with logic and don't have any consistent patterns kind of people don't tend to like that as much because it
It's
just
like the movie Eraserhead, right?
yeah, yeah, David Lynch's
You know,
erased.
it just makes me think of that. Like
Yeah, it makes no sense.
you're trying to make sense of what the movie is talking about. Then it just like seems so out of
And
the norm
that's why
that
other
you
people
can't
don't know.
follow along.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's like, well, what did it try to say? And it's
exactly.
just like they're not for a lot of people who don't know, you know, you might want to research this, but Eraserhead is a movie that is just no or no talking or hardly any talking, and it's just like so uneasy because there's like weird noises and like the dialogue and things that happen in the screen that it's just like
Seems
things
random.
that wouldn't happen in the normal world,
It's like a
you
dream.
know. And so
And not
so
everyone likes
yeah, I can
it. I
feel
mean,
that.
most people don't like that. I like it because I like dream stuff. I like weird hallucination movie stuff, and I
Mhm.
just studying film for so long. I dive deeper into the rabbit hole, you know. And so David
Yeah.
Lynch is definitely something I like a lot of his movies, but I understand why mainstream audiences don't because it's just his movies often don't make sense or they don't seem to. So that's so I think that's another factor. Like it has
Yeah,
to
maybe for the film public, maybe it's innovative, but for the mainstream, you know,
exactly.
it's
And we're talking about mainstream. We're talking about what makes things mainstream,
mainstream and iconic.
and definitely consistency and stuff that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, because in itself, like maybe Eraserhead could be an iconic movie, but it's not mainstream just because it does not appeal to the senses and understanding of people. Maybe this has to be more of a conversation about like people, like who is the public, who is the mainstream public, like
right.
um you know, because for example, um Harry Potter, why is that so interesting? Well, you know, Harry Potter was kind of like the underdog. Had always been bullied, you know, people have experienced bullying. He was always like left, you know, as you know, uh or left or seen as, you know, useless or worthless, and then all of a sudden somebody comes along and tells him like you're actually super famous in the wizard world. It's like, what do you mean? Like, I've always experienced this life, and people can relate to that. Maybe they've been abused or can feel that for the person, and so for the character, can feel for that character and say like, wow, like, you know, what is going to happen with this amazing opportunity that he has, right? And so, like you said, there's maybe that internal like logic that kind of helps the reader or the person viewing the story
Yeah, I think you're
relate to the characters.
relatability. Yeah, I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, because that's a very important. I think you know if a character's not relatable, people at least how I feel, and I think other people feel is they just don't like it as much. I think that's why movies like I think I don't know, man. I'm just going based off reviews I watched on YouTube and from what I hear in general. But like Wonder Woman 1984 didn't do very well because the villain, the rules and logic of that story didn't make sense. They could go anywhere and they're limitless, so it's hard to grasp. And Wonder Woman's character just isn't as relatable because she's like this super kind of person. And maybe they didn't add enough relatability to her character in that movie compared to the first one.
Yeah.
I think that's important, right? We were talking about
Yeah.
level of
And it's almost like it stays true to the character. Like I've recently started reading the series of Harry Potter just because I think I wanted to see what people saw in it. And so one of the things that I've realized is that the character Harry, like Harry Potter, stays very true to himself. He doesn't say like, "Oh wow, what amazing world. Like now I get this opportunity." It's like all of a sudden everything's won. No, he's still having this internal struggle of like trying to figure out like is this a dream? Is this really real? Like he still has internal like self-confidence issues because he had been bullied. It wasn't like all of a sudden day and night he just like oh, awesome, I'm a wizard, like let's just go to wizard school. And he still has those reserves, and you could kind of, the character feels very alive, very real in the story. It's not like just completely swings to one side, but it has almost like a backstory to it, and it's well developed to the sense that you kind of expect, or sort of expect, what he's going to react, how he's going to react, right? It's almost like, and I think that creates trust in the reader. It creates, consistency, so that the reader kind of expects, or sort of expects, because I think that that goes to the idea that I was talking about music. It has to be relatable, like to where the audience kind of can trust and expect what the song is gonna say, but a little bit different, so that it's just slightly new and innovative, right? And so I think it's the same way goes to developing characters. Has to be something relatable, it has to be something consistent, something that the audience can trust whenever they're viewing it and reading it, but slightly off, to where maybe there's a sense of surprise, or maybe a sense of uh you know that coincides with what was going to happen. So it almost creates a consistent character, where if the character is gets excited or gets scared about you know losing their shoes, and so when they lose their shoes, they're not just going to be like, oh, okay, this doesn't even matter. It's going to be important. And why is it important, right? um so
Mm,
yeah, I think that that's what creates uh something relatable,
yeah.
that it has a consistency in the character, not that it just swings. To your point about Wonder Woman, you know it didn't have a consistency in the villain, right? You didn't know if they were going to do this or they were going to do that. It wasn't well developed, and so you couldn't expect anything. There was nothing to expect. You couldn't, even if it was the villain, you couldn't predict what they were gonna say, or where they were going to go. It was just like, well, they're just gonna fight, maybe.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of reminding me also like the plot structure matters too, and consistency, or kind of like what you're talking about, expecting where it's gonna go. Like we expect to, you kind of have an idea of how songs work because of all
Mhm.
your years of experiences listening to songs. You have the chorus and the middle part and the beginning and the end. Well, just like that, a plot structure has to have similar things too. It has to have a beginning, middle, and end. And it has to have act one, two, and three. And it has to kind of follow a similar pattern to other movies. And that's why those movies who use that basic plot structure tend to be more mainstream because people can more easily grasp it and anticipate and expect where the story is headed. Because the worst thing you can do, well, a lot of movies make mistakes of, less mainstream ones or movies that are less popular that people don't like or call boring, is because the audience has no idea where the plot's going. Like with Eraserhead, for example, that you mentioned, you have no idea where the plot's going. You have no idea how much longer this movie's going to be, because if you don't know, if you can't anticipate what's going to happen next, then there's no way to tell time, in the movie as it progresses. So then you find yourself bored and like waiting, like, well, when is, I don't even know what's happening anymore. I can't even
Yeah,
anticipate where the middle is or the end is. I don't even know when this is going to end, and it's just, it can be stressful for the audience. And so I think that's another factor too. In mainstream, they have to have the basic plot structure there. A lot of movies that don't do that, just people don't tend to like as much. You know, where there's not really any kind of beginning, middle, or end. It's just kind of things happening. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I think that's what essentially develops, and it develops like trustworthiness. But I think aside from that, I think also what becomes so iconic is something that we would hope would exist, but we ourselves wouldn't put ourselves in those shoes to experience that journey. Because most stories talk about a journey, right? Harry Potter goes to school. goes and there's the dark side and has to fight it and or figure out and finds out that he has part of the dark side within himself, but uses it for good. And so it's very interesting how the character is developed. It's almost like it's such a weak character, but has so much power, and it doesn't know yet, right? Like it's such a like irony, such a combination to where like you kind of expect something amazing to happen. You kind of be want to be swept from your feet and
Yeah,
like
that's why movies like Star Wars: The Last Jedi failed and people hated it, because in Star Wars you have that same expectation. You've been with it for years. We know we expect certain things from a Star Wars movie or a Harry Potter movie. We expect spectacle, amazing things to happen, grand action scenes, and things that are kind of out of this world. In The Last Jedi, a lot of people were disappointed or didn't like it because it was just more basic, more just almost anticlimactic, to the point to where there wasn't any final lightsaber battle that we wanted. There wasn't much to the movie than dialogue and strange comedic parts and very small kind of action scenes compared to the other ones. Look, I'm not saying you can't make movies like that, but when it comes to something like Star Wars, people expect certain things, like you're saying, and when the expectations aren't met, it just kind of falls flat. People forget about it.
yeah. Yeah, so it's almost playing with that side of amazement and you know it's almost like when you're reading the story, like you put yourself in the shoes of that person, you're like, wow, I I want to be Harry Potter. It's like when we're little kids almost, whenever we're watching a movie and then after the movie, everybody says, I don't know if you did this, but sometimes I would say like, hey, you're Pumbaa, and then I am the lion, and she's the other lioness, and everybody takes a character from the movie, or I've seen it happen even recently. Like a couple of my friends, they're like, you kind of have a vibe of like Tony Stark, and you kind of have the beard a little bit. So we'll call you Tony Stark, and then we start kind of naming people with characters that are associated to something that we really enjoy. And so it's almost like we want to be those characters. We want to like be identified in a character, right? And so we want to put ourselves in those shoes because even though we're not them, we feel like they represent a side of us that would be them. We would like to get wild like Wolverine and just do crazy stuff and break through walls and like be able to heal just automatically, and we would like to be in those shoes, right? We would like to be that character. But even though we know it's a fictional character, but it just kind of plays with our mind, and it makes us think of the amazing possibilities that are capable of happening, right? And I think that's why we like to listen to testimonies of people, because it reminds us like what we're capable of, or what at least what our imagination is capable of.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I think so too. Yeah, I mean, final thing is like, I think I think it's so hard to predict what's going to become mainstream, but at the same time, I think everything we talked about, there's like a formula to it maybe that could be used. You have to have something that's iconic, that people can relate to, that follows internal rules of logic, that has a consistent plot that makes sense, um, and also just spectacle. Spectacle is
Yeah, it has spectacle.
unique, something original that stands out from real life. Because you can't, if it's just real life, it's not. It's like, it's
Yeah,
not really-
that's what keeps the muse going, right? The entertainment going,
yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Awesome.
different.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll leave it at that. Thank you for listening to the end of this podcast. If you stay till the end, we really appreciate your time, and also subscribe to our channel because we are completely committed to continue providing amazing content like this for you guys. Also like the video. And let us know what you thought was interesting. Are you going to create a new project with the new formula that we just talked about at the end? Let us know what your thoughts are and maybe if you would add anything to it. So until next time, we will talk to you all soon. Take care.